Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission here is always the same. We take complex, often dense source material, and we distill the absolute essence, giving you the shortcut to being truly well-informed, complete with the surprising facts and the foundational analysis.
Today, we are stepping into a genuinely unique piece of analysis that might permanently change the way you view the winter calendar. When we use the word infrastructure, we usually conjure images of concrete, steel, and data cables.
Right, roads, power grids, that kind of thing.
Exactly, logistics networks. But our source material today, a detailed sociological paper by scientific analyst Justin Lake, titled Christmas as Infrastructure, Secularization, Commodification, and the Management of Meaning, treats something profoundly cultural as something profoundly structural.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this isn't a theological paper reflecting on faith, and it's certainly not a simple, nostalgic critique lamenting the commercialization of the holidays.
Not at all.
This is a deep, academic, sociological analysis that uses Christmas as a lens to understand how modern mass societies organize themselves. So the mission today is to understand how Christmas moved from being a purely specific religious observance to becoming a piece of essential modern infrastructure.
An infrastructure that organizes our schedules, our economy, and our collective behavior.
It's a huge claim.
It is. And Lake's paper provides a radical premise right up front, which really challenges the common narrative. It suggests that the transformation of Christmas, the shift away from its theological core, is not a story of moral or cultural decline as it's often framed by critics.
Which is how you almost always hear it discussed.
Right. Instead, he says it was a necessary structural reconfiguration. It was a logistical requirement built into the system to allow this massive event to fit within the demands of modern capitalist pluralistic societies.
So if we strip away the sentiment, the core question we are trying to answer today is highly sociological. How did a Christian holy day become a universally accessible, highly commercialized, and critically theologically neutral cultural event?
And what does that entire successful process reveal about how modern societies, faced with massive scale and diversity, manage shared meaning?
And how they maintain social cohesion. That's the real core of it.
To properly analyze the structural role, Lake begins by looking at the historical trajectory. We have to trace the evolution from what he calls a theologically grounded Christian holy day.
So a specific, demanding liturgical event.
Exactly, to the secular, consumer-driven cultural event we recognize today. This evolution is the starting point for understanding why Christmas behaves less like a choice and more like, well, essential infrastructure.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because the paper applies rigorous sociological analytical tools, specifically secularization, rationalization, and commodification, to this intensely emotional subject. It takes the warm, fuzzy concept of Christmas and subjects it to cold, hard systems analysis, showing how deliberate structural changes allowed for its mass expansion.
And this application of sociological theory is where the depth of the argument lies. Let's start with secularization. Lake addresses it not as a loss of belief, which is the common understanding, but as a reduction of the religious institution's authority over the public meaning of the event.
So the structure is being removed from clerical control.
And handed over to administrators, market managers, and media producers.
Okay, so secularization, in this context, is the migration of authoritative control. But then we introduce rationalization. How exactly did rationalization apply to a holiday? I mean, usually that term refers to making factories or bureaucracy more efficient.
It applies profoundly. Rationalization is the process of replacing traditions, rules of thumb, and, emotionally driven behavior with systematic, calculated, and highly efficient methods. So think about Christmas through this lens. What used to be a decentralized, locally specific, messy, and religiously dictated celebration has become entirely standardized and predictable.
That makes a lot of sense. The exact date is rationalized. The duration of the season is rationalized. I mean, in the U.S., it starts the second Thanksgiving ends.
Like clockwork.
The acceptable symbols are rationalized. The emotional scripts are rationalized. You're expected to feel cheer and nostalgia on demand. It becomes a reliable, repeatable system year after year.
Precisely. And the supply chain is the ultimate example of rationalization. To manage this immense economic cycle, everything from manufacturing schedules to logistics carriers, from standardized musical playlists to globally recognized imagery of Santa, must be optimized and predictable.
Right.
If Christmas retained its localized, unpredictable, theologically diverse roots, it couldn't be rationalized into the economic engine it is today. It just wouldn't function at that scale.
And then the third pillar is commodification. This is perhaps the most familiar aspect,
Right.
but Lake uses it structurally. It's not just about selling things.
No, it's the structural shift where the value of the experience itself becomes measured primarily through exchange and consumption. The ritual experience itself becomes a purchasable good.
Okay, so you have secularization, rationalization, and commodification all working together.
Correct. And the core argument that underpins the entire paper is this. Christmas was not emptied of meaning, but its meaning was structurally reconfigured through these processes. It was optimized to allow for maximum mass participation within rapidly expanding capitalist systems.
And the paper traces this evolution through very distinct stages, showing that this structural shift wasn't a sudden cultural decision, but a long, slow layering of reconfigurations.
I think we need to go into depth on these stages because they really define the foundational structure.
We do. The first stage was the early Christian liturgical observance. This was a purely specific church calendar event, often focused more on the Epiphany than on the 25th itself. It was highly demanding of specific theological understanding and firmly controlled by the institution.
So its reach was bounded by the reach of the church itself. Entirely. Next came syncretic adaptation, where the ritual began to pick up traditions from other cultures and times like incorporating winter solstice traditions, feasting, and gift-giving elements inherited from pagan rituals.
This was the first layer of structural softening then. It made it broader and less strictly doctrinal.
That's a great way to put it. That structural softening continued into the Victorian sentimentalization. This is a pivotal point because authority over meaning began to migrate out of the church and into the home.
So it becomes about family.
Exactly. Christmas became defined by domesticity, family, innocence, and emotion. This shift created a foundation for emotional resonance that transcended theological commitment.
And the Victorians also started the process of formalizing the symbols that would later be rationalized for mass consumption. The standardized tree, the idea of a unified family gathering, the focus on children.
That structural framework was then picked up by media standardization. As industrial society created mass media newspapers, magazines, radio, and later film, the acceptable narratives and symbols of Christmas were defined, reproduced, and distributed globally.
This is where the local, diverse Christmas becomes the national, uniform Christmas.
It is. Think about the standardized image of Santa Claus. The red suit, the sleigh, the North Pole. That's media standardization at work, creating a universally recognizable, predictable, and crucially, non-specific symbol.
And finally, we arrive at the massive wave of post-war consumer expansion.
The final piece. This is the stage that fully cemented its role in the global economy. Christmas became the engine that drove the Q4 retail cycle, creating an economic imperative for its continued existence and success, regardless of shifting individual beliefs.
So Lake is arguing that each of these 5 stages was a necessary layer of reconfiguration. Each layer stripped away some theological specificity and added layers of emotional, nostalgic, and commercial accessibility.
Preparing Christmas for its role today as infrastructure. Yes. And this structural evolution forces a fundamental change in the symbolic core of the event. The paper asserts that Christmas persists as a dominant social institution by deliberately prioritizing broad, accessible elements over doctrinal specificity.
So the new structural priority list is clear. Emotional resonance, nostalgia, and above all, consumption. That's the new engine.
That's the engine.
The analysis focuses on the fact that the symbolic core is fundamentally altered. It's driven by sentiment and spending, yet the social function of the ritual is preserved.
This preservation of function is vital. The theological purpose may have attenuated, it may have weakened or dissolved, but the massive social role remains vital. The modern society requires a communal, annual, massive ritual pause that organizes labor, rest, and capital flow.
And the original religious framework provided the ready-made template for that.
Which the modern system then repurposed. The structure survived the change in content.
It's a compelling analogy to return to the idea of physical infrastructure. It's like taking that old stone cathedral, a building originally designed purely for spiritual devotion and specific ritual, and modernizing it into a major high-speed rail transit hub.
Oh, that's good.
It still organizes human movement and time on a massive scale. It still determines the city's flow, but its underlying purpose has entirely shifted from devotion to logistics and commerce. The system needs the container, but it no longer needs the original content.
And this shift is what makes it structural. The sheer predictability and necessity of the ritual, independent of belief, is what defines its infrastructural role.
I wonder, though, doesn't Lake acknowledge the risk that this transformation risks making the ritual feel completely hollow for some? Or does he argue that functional rhythm and social cohesion simply supersede the need for deep, specific meaning in a mass society?
He certainly notes the critique of hollowing, but his analysis focuses on the functional reality. He implies that for a ritual to function at scale in a pluralistic system, the specific demanding meaning must be neutralized.
The structural imperative wins out.
It has to. The need for a shared, predictable, massive social event is prioritized over the theological depth. The system requires cohesion more than it requires belief. If the first section established the historical structural transformation, this second section analyzes the contemporary consequences, specifically within the self-contained symbolic system of retail.
Right.
Lake makes a very pointed observation that is instantly recognizable. In contemporary shared commercial environments, Christmas contains no necessary references to the Nativity.
Right. And yeah, this is true. If you walk into any major big box store or check a major company's holiday advertisements in December, you see a standardized visual vocabulary. Trees, lights, gifts, Santa, reindeer, snowmen, maybe a generalized phrase about peace or goodwill.
But the symbols relating to the manger, the incarnation, or the salvific narrative are conspicuously absent.
They are structurally omitted. It's not an accident.
And here is the paper's crucial insight. That absence is structural, it is not incidental, and it is certainly not an oversight born of ignorance. Lake states that this symbolic system operates independently of Christian theology, and that absence is the deliberate structural outcome of three powerful forces working in concert.
Okay, what are they?
Market logic, the pressures of pluralism, and most importantly, the concept we need to deeply unpack: symbolic risk management.
Symbolic risk management. That's a powerful, almost corporate term. It suggests that including specific theological elements is viewed not as an expression of faith, but as a potential liability.
A liability that must be mitigated by the system to maintain profitability.
Wow.
Precisely. We need to focus on the paper's most provocative point to understand this logic. Jesus is excluded from the dominant retail infrastructure, not because he is controversial in a political sense or even because he's unpopular. He's excluded simply because he is specific.
Because he is specific. What does that mean in practical terms? Specificity is the market risk.
Exactly. It creates boundary conditions. If a symbol, say, the manger is central, it immediately introduces interpretive demands. It makes a specific religious claim.
And to fully participate in that symbol, the participant must recognize and accept the theological premise it represents.
Which creates barriers to entry.
Right. If you introduce a symbol that requires a specific belief system to unlock, you instantly exclude potential participants and, crucially, potential consumers. The market system, by definition, requires broad appeal and minimum barrier to entry.
Think about the logistics of it. If you manage a national chain of stores, you want symbols that are instantaneously accessible and universally applicable. A snowman is a neutral symbol of winter and plays zero interpretive demand.
Anyone can get on board with a snowman.
Anyone. A Santa Claus, as standardized, requires only an emotional or nostalgic interpretation. That's a low demand. The Nativity requires a specific historical and theological assent. That's a high demand.
So the market simply cannot afford high-demand symbols. The conflict is inherent. Market logic demands universality, and theological specificity inherently undermines that universality.
And so the most efficient structure for the retail economy is therefore one that excludes these specific demanding elements.
In favor of symbols that are universally accessible.
Like family, generosity, or, most universally, the standardized, repeatable act of consumption itself.
Lake gives us a fascinating lens here. He suggests we contrast the symbolic system. Symbols like the Christmas tree or wreaths are often called secular, but he argues they are better understood as, neutralized.
Neutralized, that's the word. They retain just enough emotional resonance and association with the season to prompt participation, but they carry no specific theological boundary conditions. They are administratively safe.
I find this idea of symbolic risk management extremely compelling, especially when you consider scale. If you are structuring the retail cycle for hundreds of millions of people across dozens of belief systems, the symbols you choose must be the lowest common denominator of emotional and financial accessibility.
The logistics system, the shipping companies, the stores, they literally cannot afford to exclude anyone who might buy a gift based on theological difference.
And thus, the system engages in symbolic risk management. It systematically neutralizes the content by removing the elements that might require belief, assent, or imply exclusive boundary conditions.
The resulting public, retail Christmas is safe, predictable, and maximally profitable precisely because it makes no essential claims on the participant beyond functional participation.
Show up, spend, feel nostalgic.
That's the script.
But is Lake suggesting that the commercial managers, the CEOs, the marketing executives, the store planners are consciously sitting in a room and orchestrating this dilution of religious meaning? Or is it a purely emergent outcome of the blind, powerful hand of the market?
He leans heavily toward it being an emergent structural outcome. It's driven by market logic and pluralistic necessity rather than some kind of conscious conspiracy.
So it's just the system optimizing itself.
The market naturally selects for the most efficient, least demanding symbols. Any company that includes too much theological specificity risks alienating large swaths of the population, including, rival denominations or non-believers who still participate in the consumption cycle.
So the system weeds out specificity purely on the basis of economic efficiency and scale. It's the ultimate rationalization of the ritual.
Exactly. The ritual is valuable, but the theological specifics are inefficient. In a highly rationalized system, inefficiency, in this case barriers to participation, must be eliminated. The market's infrastructure repurposes the holiday, discarding the parts that interfere with logistics and profit maximization.
This analysis fundamentally changes the perspective of the war on Christmas argument, if you want to call it that.
It reframes it entirely.
It suggests it's not a culture war driven by malice, but a functional imperative driven by economics and sociology. The theology is being neutralized by the sheer scale of the operation.
It's the cost of being dominant. For Christmas to function as essential infrastructure for the global economy, it had to become symbolic public domain.
Now we move the discussion beyond individual belief and the specifics of the retail environment. Section 3 shifts the focus to the sociological significance of Christmas, regardless of what you or I personally believe or even how much we spend.
Right.
Lake asserts that Christmas is a civilizational ritual that matters profoundly in a sociological sense, well beyond belief or commerce.
That framing is key. It removes the focus from individual piety or consumption habits and places it firmly on societal function and cohesion. The ritual is so large, so ingrained, that it functions as a social operating system, deeply embedded in the societal code.
This civilizational ritual organizes fundamental societal elements at an enormous scale. It's hard to overstate how much it affects our collective existence. First, he says, it organizes time.
Absolutely. Think about the temporal architecture of our year. Christmas structures our entire calendar. It defines the endpoint of the fiscal year for many businesses. It sets the collective deadlines for academic grading, publishing, and many forms of employment. We all rush toward the holiday break.
Even if you don't celebrate, your work schedule and travel plans are dictated by this massive shared pause. You can't escape it.
You can't. It also organizes behavior. Lake details the social scripts we all comply with. The protocols for family gatherings, the acceptable level of seasonal empathy expected in public interactions, the mandated gift exchange protocols, the expected consumption of specific media.
The movies, the music.
All of it. These scripts are followed often out of social obligation, not deep spiritual conviction.
And it organizes emotion. There is a collective expectation driven by decades of media standardization for a specific emotional state: cheer, sentimentality, nostalgia, and goodwill.
Whether or not you genuinely feel those things, the external environment, the music, the decorations, the social media feeds compels you to participate in that emotional script.
And of course, the economic activity is structurally organized. The logistical and retail cycles for Q4 are almost entirely dependent on the structural rhythm of the Christmas season. If that rhythm faltered, the economic shock would be immense.
The paper stresses the crucial point that ritual participation shapes social norms independently of theological assent. You don't have to believe in the Nativity to be deeply affected by the annual closure of businesses, the immense travel chaos, or the social pressure to buy the right gifts in mid-December.
The ritual compels behavior, regardless of belief, because it has successfully transitioned into social infrastructure.
Exactly.
So the inheritance matters deeply here. Lake states that individuals do not need to believe in God to be shaped by a calendar structured by religious inheritance. The foundations were built on a religious template, and even if the faith element has dissolved, the physical and temporal infrastructure remains.
It remains, determining the shape of everything built upon it. This is the core evidence showing how modern secular societies repurpose inherited religious frameworks, even when their theological foundations have been attenuated.
So they don't demolish the massive structure.
No, they simply strip out the specific theological programming and recode the system to run on commercial and social cohesion programming instead. It's pragmatic.
And this leads us to the crucial conceptual shift, the migration of authority. The ritual persists, it remains massive and organizing, but authority over its meaning migrates.
It moves away from confessional institutions, the church or the tradition, and into the hands of the administrative managers of mass society.
Public Christmas becomes, in Lake's terminology, infrastructural rather than confessional.
Right, and that's a key distinction. Confessional meaning requires belief, internal conviction, and submission to doctrine. Infrastructural meaning, however, requires only compliance with logistics and participation in the shared social schedule.
Let's elaborate on what that compliance with logistics looks like in practical life for the listener.
Because it's everywhere.
Oh, it is. Think about mandatory behavior. Compliance means adhering to shared deadlines. It means the necessity of planning travel during the most congested window of the year. It means factory shutdowns are mandated, forcing you to organize production around the expectation of a universal pause.
It means having to participate in the company's mandatory holiday party, even if you find the whole affair tedious.
That's a perfect example. These are logistical requirements placed on you by the infrastructure, independent of your personal feelings about the holiday itself.
So if Christmas is infrastructure, like a national highway system, it is expected to remain neutral, unobtrusive, and broadly accessible to all citizens, regardless of their background.
You can't have a transit system that only operates efficiently for specific belief groups. It must function as a logistical requirement of a pluralistic society.
And that expectation of neutrality places severe limitations on the public, visible elements of the ritual. It does. The authority over meaning migrates to commercial entities, media producers and administrators, the managers of the infrastructure, who prioritize the efficient, neutral functioning of the system over the specific, demanding theological content.
So the very success and colossal scale of the ritual demand that its original meaning be neutralized to maintain that scale and neutrality. It's a fascinating, almost ironic inversion.
It is. The bigger and more dominant the ritual gets, the more vague and non-specific it must become.
And this neutrality is not achieved by consensus. It's achieved by administration. The people running the calendar, the media, and the supply chain have become the de facto arbiters of public meaning.
Defining Christmas as an efficient, predictable system of exchange, travel, and standardized sentiment.
Let's move to the fourth and perhaps most revealing section of Lake's paper, which examines the cost of this structural dominance, the categorical asymmetry in recognition between Christmas and other observances.
This comparison is crucial because it helps us define precisely what Christmas is structurally. The analyst examines how minority religious or cultural observances interact with the dominant societal structure. Minority observances typically seek what Lake terms bounded accommodation.
What does that bounded accommodation entail? What does that look like?
It means they're seeking a specific, contained block of time or attention within the existing infrastructure. For example, a minority group might ask for a specific day off work, an exemption from a standardized dress code for a specific period, or a small symbolic acknowledgement in a public space, like a specific display that lasts for a week.
They're asking for a specific contained piece of the clock or the calendar.
They are essentially asking the infrastructure managers for a temporary variance or a small dedicated lane on the highway.
That's a great analogy.
They recognize their place as specific, bounded claims within a larger system. But the situation for Christmas is fundamentally different. It seeks no accommodation because, as Lake points out, it already structures weeks of time, dominates economic cycles, and saturates cultural life.
It doesn't ask for a piece of the structure.
It is the structure itself.
And this structural significance, the fact that Christmas is the default setting for the entire civilization, has a necessary cost, according to the paper.
The crucial conclusion of this comparison is stark. The price of this immense foundational dominance is theological neutrality. The moment a structure becomes this central, this dominant, it cannot afford to enforce specificity or exclusive claims.
Because specificity creates exclusion, and exclusion is the enemy of infrastructure.
Precisely. This directly explains how neutrality is achieved in shared pluralistic spaces like shopping malls, city halls, and public schools. It is not achieved through the equal representation of all beliefs, which is the theoretical idealistic goal of pluralism.
Right. That's what we're often told is the goal.
But he argues it's achieved through the dilution of the dominant ones.
So you don't build up, you just water down.
Correct. If the public square tried to equally represent Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, and every other system with demanding specific symbols, you would create an overwhelming visual, symbolic, and administrative cacophony.
It would be chaos.
The market and administrative solution is far simpler and more rationalized. Adopt symbols that demand the least from participants.
So the process works by taking the tradition that organizes the entire social system, Christmas, and rendering it vague, stripped of its demanding theology, thereby allowing it to accommodate everyone who needs to use that social framework, regardless of their private beliefs.
The paper makes it explicitly clear. Dominant rituals are not suppressed. They are transformed until they no longer make exclusive claims. The system needs the massive economic and temporal framework that Christmas provides, but it systematically rejects the theological exclusivity that came with the original framework.
And this transformation process, which involves neutralizing theology in the public square, is routinely framed by institutions and media as simple inclusion.
As progressive accommodation of a diverse society.
But Lake argues for a more precise sociological understanding.
He concludes that this entire complex process should be understood as the logistical management of meaning in mass society. It is an administrative necessity, not merely a cultural preference or a political agenda.
Not an ideology.
No. In a society defined by massive scale, complex logistics, and irreducible pluralism, meaning itself must be managed and neutralized to ensure the smooth, predictable, and profitable operation of the infrastructure.
Logistical management of meaning. That's staggering. To realize that the symbols we encounter every December are essentially bureaucratic products designed for maximum utility and minimum friction.
It shifts the entire conversation away from value judgments and into systems engineering. The system cannot tolerate high-demand symbols in its public spaces because they create friction and potential gridlock within the infrastructure.
So meaning is managed down to its most neutral common denominators.
That's the process.
So to bring this back to the final balance, the paper shows that public Christmas retains the functional ritual practices, the scheduling, the lights, the music, the family gathering scripts, the gift exchange, and the useful emotional scripts.
The nostalgia, the sentimentality, all of it.
But it consciously relinquishes authority to define meaning in shared space.
The sociological beauty of this solution is its pragmatism. Private belief remains intact. People are perfectly free to celebrate the Nativity with intense devotion in their homes, their churches, or their own bounded cultural spheres.
Right. No one is stopping that.
No one. However, the public meaning, the part that organizes the economy, the calendar, and social behavior, becomes administratively neutral.
It becomes, in the truest sense of Lake's thesis, an economic and cultural utility, stripped of its demanding specific theological claims. It is the vast, essential infrastructure of cheer and commerce that keeps the modern social system running smoothly during the critical winter phase. This entire analysis by Justin Lake is a powerful, almost unsettling reminder that culture and commerce are inextricably linked, and that social cohesion in large, complex modern states is often less about shared spiritual belief and more about careful logistical engineering.
Absolutely. The core argument we've unpacked is that Christmas's power and prevalence in the modern world is derived from its successful conversion from a specific religious event into a shared, emotionally resonant, and economically vital piece of secular infrastructure.
It's a testament to the power of rationalization at scale.
It is. It also thoroughly challenges the simplistic view of secularization as just losing belief or declining morality.
Which is the default argument you always hear.
Instead, Lake demonstrates how social systems are utterly pragmatic. They identify powerful inherited structures, and they repurpose them, diluting the dogma while preserving the necessary rhythm and framework for contemporary social cohesion and economic function.
It leaves us with a truly provocative thought, one that extends well beyond the month of December. We're left to consider the implications of this logistical management of meaning. If a society requires its dominant inherited rituals, its most powerful organizational tools, to shed all specificity and demand to maintain functionality at mass scale.
Then what other powerful inherited frameworks, structures, or narratives are currently being subtly diluted or repurposed right now to maintain mass participation and social cohesion in modern pluralistic life?
A compelling thought to mull over as you see the first holiday ads next year, or as you navigate the logistical demands of your own schedule. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.